In less than 2 months, Slovenian voters will be going to the polls to vote in a new parliament. This will be the first legislative general election in Europe of 2026. So therefore, for my 10th entry into my Political Parties of Europe series, I will be looking at the political parties of Slovenia. Like with my other videos in this series, I will begin with some background on the political system in the country. After that, I'll take you through the 3 parties in the government. Then I'll take you through the 5 opposition parties currently represented in the parliament. And then I'll take you through 2 more parties that could well be on course to win seats later this year. One thing I'll do slightly differently from what I've previously done, and something I may continue doing in the future if it seems to work out, is to take electoral alliances in one go, still emphasizing differences between parties within alliances though. If there are varying significance levels between the parties, this will be reflected in how much attention I give them. And so, without any further ado, let's get started with some background. Slovenia is a parliamentary republic. The country's democracy traces its roots back to the early 1990s. From the post-World War II period through to 1991, the country was part of Yugoslavia. But as the Yugoslavian Republic started weakening at the end of the 1980s, Slovenia was allowed to hold parliamentary elections, the first of which were held in 1990. The following year, Slovenia declared independence from Yugoslavia, and following the 10-day war, the country won its freedom. A lot easier than their neighbors to the south. Slovenia has a prime minister and a president. Like many other European countries, the president is largely a ceremonial role, and the true power is held by the PM. The president is elected every 5 years using a runoff electoral system. They can serve for a maximum of 2 terms consecutively. The last election was held in 2022 when Nataša Pirc-Musar won. This role is responsible for appointing governments, representing the country abroad sometimes, and calling elections, all largely dictated by parliamentarians and parliamentary arithmetic. Slovenia has a kind of bicameral parliament with an upper and a lower chamber. The upper chamber, the National Council, is made up of representatives of various interest groups in Slovenia, and so is not directly elected. But this chamber is very limited in its power and mostly serves to scrutinize and improve legislation. It has the power to veto bills, but an absolute majority in the lower chamber can override this veto. The lower chamber, or the National Assembly, is where the action happens, where most legislation originates, and where the government is formed. The Assembly has 90 deputies. 88 of these are elected at least every 4 years through a proportional representation system, with the country divided into 8 multi-member electoral constituencies, which may be adjusted to ensure national proportionality of seat allocation. It is a preferential closed list system where it requires a high percentage of personal votes to override party lists. There is an electoral threshold of 4%. The other 2 seats are reserved for special representatives of the Hungarian and Italian minorities in the country. These members normally being independents and are elected in separate elections. The last general election was held in 2022. As of today, the largest party in the Assembly is the centrist to center-left Social Liberal Freedom Movement with 39 seats. The second largest is the right-wing National Conservative Slovenian Democratic Party with 24 seats. The third largest is the center-left Social Democrats with 9 seats, and the fourth largest is the center-right Christian Democratic New Slovenia Party. The Prime Minister is appointed by the President, but is dependent on a majority of support in the Assembly. The current Prime Minister is Robert Golob, from the aforementioned Freedom Movement, who leads a left-of-center government in coalition with the Social Democrats and the left-wing Eco-Socialists, the Left Party. Slovenian politics in the last years normally splits parties into 2 blocks, a left-wing bloc and a right-wing bloc. And Slovenia is of course also a member of the European Union, and so for every party I'll tell you who the party sits with in the European Parliament. Before I continue, I'd like to thank the sponsor that's making this series possible. Private Internet Access, or PIA, is a world-leading VPN provider that prides itself on being the most transparent provider out there. Over 30 million downloads and an excellent rating on Trustpilot. This is the real deal. But what's the point of using a VPN? Well, the first reason is privacy. A VPN hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. This shields your digital life from the people and companies that would otherwise be able to look at what websites you visit. Internet service providers, network administrators, and maybe even government censors. Not using PIA is like having strangers come into the polling booth with you on election day. It's a bit strange and intimidating. A second reason to use a VPN is for content. When I make these videos, I'm constantly searching through foreign media, and you'd be surprised at just how much material, especially TV programs and news reports, are blocked for foreign IP addresses. That's where PIA comes in and helps to give me access to all the information I need. It doesn't just work for trying to watch the news in Slovenia. It also works for all major streaming services. So with PIA, you can watch movies and shows on Netflix that aren't available in your country or region. For example, one of my favorite TV shows, Schitt's Creek, was just taken off of Danish Netflix. But with PIA, I can just set my VPN to the UK and watch it like nothing ever happened. Private internet access is available for all platforms and can be used on an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. They're currently offering a special 2-year deal where you can save 83% on your subscription and get 4 months free on top of that. That's a monthly price of less than €2. Just use the link on the screen right here, which is also in the description of the video. And best of all, signing up for PIA is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and customer service is available 24/7. And with that, I think it's time we turn to the government parties. And we'll begin with the largest one, the Freedom Movement. The Freedom Movement is a centrist to center-left social liberal party. In the European Parliament, it sits with Renew Europe. In ideology, this is quite a standard socially liberal party. On the economy, while it's a party rooted in pro-business policy, it has a massive emphasis on social responsibility, especially with regards to the environment and workers' rights, such as, for example, increasing the minimum wage and emphasizing flexible working. On foreign policy, it is very pro-EU, pro-NATO, and very Western-minded. On social issues, it's very LGBT supportive, has a lot of focus on gender equality, and it has been very supportive of making immigration to Slovenia for non-EU citizens easier, both for economic migrants and asylum seekers, and it is also a party that puts a lot of emphasis on the rule of law and institutionalism, supporting more independence for the courts and for state media. The party has a bit of a wild history. It was founded only in 2021 as the Green Actions Party by Jure Leben, a former environment minister for the similar Modern Centre Party, which is now dissolved. The party didn't take off until the next year when Robert Golob, a businessman and former politician who had been involved in a lot of other liberal parties, took over and renamed it to the Freedom Movement. He also turned the previously very environment-focused party into a rule of law institutionalist anti-corruption party. This at a time when the incumbent right-wing government of Janez Janša was facing criticisms of weakening the rule of law and undermining democratic institutions. The party rode this wave to a massive electoral victory the same year, taking a plurality of seats in an absolute earthquake election. It then formed a left-of-center coalition government with the Social Democrats and the left. The government has been fairly successful in these more liberal-minded policies, securing more freedoms for state media and more independence for the courts. However, it's also suffered scandals itself, and Golob has been found to have breached integrity rules by the country's anti-corruption watchdog. The government has also expanded the governmental cabinet, including introducing ministries for the environment and higher education, and it's also marked itself as being one of the most pro-Palestine and Israel-critic governments in Europe. Today it is still led by Golob, who is very synonymous with the party that he made incredibly successful just a few years ago. He is quite a divisive figure, but amongst the left-leaning liberal part of the country, he is generally quite popular, though the shine from the previous election has definitely worn off. At the last election, the party won 41 seats in the first election it ever contested, with over 34% of the vote. According to Politico's poll of polls, they are on course for a big decrease down to about 21% of the vote, which would roughly translate to 23 seats in the assembly. The next government party is that of the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats are a centre-left, believe it or not, social democratic party. In the European Parliament, it sits with the SD grouping. Like the last party, the Social Democrats is also fairly standard ideologically. In this case, a standard social democratic party. It supports a strong welfare state, support for public services, and a hesitancy around these services working with private contractors. Throughout its history, the party has also been very critical of privatization, especially around housing, which they argue the government should play a much bigger role in securing for people. On foreign policy, the party is very internationalist, supporting the European Union and further integration there, as well as also being staunchly supportive of Ukraine and playing a very significant role in Slovenia's current government's pro-Palestine foreign policy. This is one of the more socially liberal of the European social democratic parties, having been quite pro-LGBT rights, actively pro-gender equality, And on immigration, the party is generally quite supportive and advocates for easy and humane processes for legal migration, but they are also critical of uncontrolled migration and have advocated for EU-wide solutions to broader European border control and policy problems. The party was founded in 1990 as a rebrand of the until then ruling League of Communists of Slovenia, a branch of the Yugoslavia-wide party that had ruled Yugoslavia for decades. It stood in the first election in 1990 as the League of Communists of Slovenia Party of Democratic Renewal, where it did well, but a coalition of conservative and liberals kept them out of government. Throughout the following decade and a half, the party would work to shed its affiliation with the former communist governments of Yugoslavia. In the mid-1990s, it merged with other left-wing parties, and in 2005, it changed its name to the much more moderate-sounding Social Democrats. The Social Democrats have been a keen participant in governments in Slovenia, normally as a junior coalition partner to various liberal-type parties. The first government it took part in was the Liberal Democratic Party-led government in the early 1990s. It also took part in other governments led by the Liberal Democrats in the 1990s and the early 2000s. But in 2008, the party had a massively successful election and formed its own government led by the party's only ever Prime Minister, Borut Pahor. However, as this came around the financial crisis, the government decided to adopt some pretty hardline austerity measures, and the government collapsed internally, with the Social Democrats reduced to a third of their previous size in the following election. But the party has been back in and out of many coalitions since then. Today, the party is led by Machaz Han, who also serves as the Minister of the Economy, Tourism and Sport. He became leader in 2024 and is part of the party's more pragmatic wing. In 2022, the party had a poor election, winning less than 7% of the vote and only taking 7 seats. In polls today, it stands to a bit of an increase to about 9% of the electorate and something like 10 seats. The next and final party of the government is the Left. The Left is a left-wing eco-socialist party. In the European Parliament, it sits with the Left grouping. This is the most left-wing mainstream party in Slovenia. It positions itself on the left on the welfare state and on nationalization, advocating for nationalization of housing corporations, for example. It also advocates for much stronger workers' rights, for a higher minimum wage, for more progressive taxation, as well as green and environmentally friendly policies and restrictions on big business. It is also a very socially liberal party on LGBT issues, on gender inequality, and actively prides itself on being anti-racist and anti-xenophobic. It advocates for liberal immigration policies while being skeptical of the West in foreign policy terms. It has historically opposed NATO, almost collapsing a government negotiation in 2018 over this issue, and it's skeptical of the European Union, but does not advocate for a Slovenian exit. It supports the sovereignty of Ukraine, but also partially blames NATO for the war there, and it is of course a very anti-Israel, very pro-Palestine party. The party emerged from the anti-austerity movements that sprung up in the early 2010s. First, it was founded as a coalition between 3 minor parties in 2014, these being the Democratic Socialist Democratic Labour Party, the Eco-Socialist Party for Sustainable Development of Slovenia, and the Marxist Initiative for Democratic Socialism. In the 2014 election, this alliance won 6 seats, and 3 years later, the 2 latter of the parties merged into one party. In 2018, the left was invited to support a center-left liberal-led government led by Marjan Sarec, of his own list of Marjan Sarec party. However, during initial negotiations, the left requested a referendum on Slovenian NATO membership be agreed to for their support. But as this was looking to collapse the negotiations, they ended up softening their demands. And this reflects the internal battle within the party. Like many socialist parties on the left, there's a big internal disagreement about how compromise-friendly the party should be. While the party did in the end give in 2018 and did also join the Robert Golob-led coalition government in 2022, factions within the party are much less inclined to work with the rest of the Slovenian left. In 2023, a big internal conflict between the left and the more moderate wings of the party took place. The moderate wing won the battle, leading to the selection of co-leader Asta Vrečko, along with the longer-serving co-leader Luka Mesec, who has been on the receiving end of a lot of the left wing for years. At this year's election, the party will stand in an alliance with the left-wing Green Party, Vesna. Vesna is a more liberal and pro-European party than the left, sitting with the Greens European Free Alliance in the European Parliament. It was founded in 2022, where it did not manage to win any seats in the assembly. However, it did win a single seat in the European Parliament election in 2024. The left won 5 seats at the last general election, with about 4.5% of the vote. The alliance between these two left-wing parties looks on course to take about 8% of the vote at this year's election, which roughly translates to 7 seats. And that's the government parties. Now to the opposition. And we'll start with the biggest beast in the Pride land, the Slovenian Democratic Party. The Slovenian Democratic Party is a right-wing national conservative party. In the European Parliament, it sits with the European People's Party. This is a party that favors a strong sense of national identity, as well as hardline views on immigration, an end to the EU quota system, and it's also critical of multiculturalism and supportive of requirements for immigrants to fully integrate. On social issues, it's also quite skeptical of LGBT issues. Currently, that really takes the form of criticisms of transgender ideology and LGBT matters featured in school curriculums. On the economy, it is very liberal, favoring lower taxes, less regulation, more privatization, less environmental-focused hurdles, and much more support for businesses. On international relations, it differs from a lot of other national conservative parties, though, and has a more standard conservative worldview. Very supportive of the EU, NATO, Ukraine, and of course, Israel. The party was founded in 1989 as the Social Democratic Party of Slovenia, initially a bit more of a center-left type party that worked with other parties from the center-left to the right to keep the communists out of power in the first election of a more or less free Slovenia. It formally rebranded to the Slovenian Democratic Party in 2003. However, the ideological shift actually started way before that in the early 1990s when Janez Janša, a staunch anti-communist, took over the party. From the very start, it was a party which actively participated as a junior coalition partner in center-to-center-right governments under various Christian democratic parties. From the early 2000s onwards, it became the main party of the Slovenian right, having led 3 different governments, all with Janša serving as its prime minister. The last government it led was a relatively short-lived one from 2020 to 2022, and was a very divisive government, especially with regards to the rule of law principles that many argued were weakened during this government. That led to a series of protests against the government and the emergence and success of the very rule of law, anti-corruption focused Robert Golob and the Freedom Movement. Janša still leads the party today, which he's now done for well over 30 years. He's a very talented politician, assertive, charismatic, strategic, but also of course very polarizing, and someone who represents a serious democratic threat as seen through the eyes of his detractors. At the last election, the party did all right, actually taking 27 seats with about 23.5% of the vote share. It was the absolute collapse of other right-of-center parties that led to the end of the Slovenian Democratic Party-led government. But this year, the party is on course for a bit of a surge to something like 26% of the vote, which would roughly translate to 28 seats as the polls stand today. Next up in the opposition, we have New Slovenia. New Slovenia, Christian Democrats, as is the party's official formal name, is, as you'd expect, a center-right Christian Democratic Party. In the European Parliament, it sits with the European People's Party. New Slovenia is socially conservative and puts a lot of emphasis on wanting the family unit to play a key role in society. It generally opposes same-sex marriage and LGBT issues being covered in schools. It is fairly immigration skeptical from a cultural stance of rejecting multiculturalism. It is also the most significant pro-life party in Slovenia, where the abortion debate is otherwise not all that prominent. On financial policy, it advocates for a balanced view. Low taxes, support for businesses, and less inclined for regulation, while also favoring a strong welfare state that supports the most vulnerable people and families. It supports the EU, NATO, and Ukraine, and has taken a more balanced view on the Israel-Palestine question. The party was founded in 2000 due to a split in the Slovenian People's Party. The then Prime Minister Andrej Bajuk left the party alongside a few other members to found New Slovenia, but that government lost power a few months later at the election when the Liberals took over. New Slovenia never became a major party and has not led a government since then, but it has participated in all the Slovenian Democratic Party-led governments since. In 2008, it did not win any seats for the parliament, putting it on the brink of collapse, but it managed to squeeze back into parliament 3 years later and has retained a 1-digit number of seats ever since. The party is currently led by Resni.Ca, who was elected to the post just a few months ago. He's a former infrastructure minister and is seen as a fairly moderate and compromise-seeking person within the party, and someone who would once again be able to work quite effectively in a post-election coalition government. At this year's election, it is standing in an alliance with two other minor parties. These are the Slovenian People's Party and Focus of Marto Lutric. The Slovenian People's Party is a centre-right agrarian party. It traditionally sits with the European People's Party in the European Parliament. It advocates for farmers and rural development, supports agricultural subsidies, and criticizes environmental policies that add regulatory difficulties for farmers. It is critical of political centralization and has more socially conservative views on the family unit, same-sex marriage, and on abortion. This party was founded in 1988, but traces organizational roots back almost 100 years before that. It was a pretty successful party in the early years of Slovenian democracy, serving in coalitions led by both the Liberals and the Conservatives. However, in the 2014 election, it didn't make the threshold and didn't get any elected members to the assembly. The same happened in the two following elections, and today it has become a pretty minor factor. Focus of Marto Lutric is a centre-right economically liberal conservative party. It does not have any European Parliament affiliation. It was founded just last year by Marto Lutric, the president of the National Council and a successful former businessman. It's very much a business-focused party supporting free market policy, lower taxation, while still maintaining some socially conservative elements. It is electorally entirely untested. At the last election, New Slovenia received 8 seats with just under 7% of the vote share, a decent result for the party relative to recent years. The Slovenian People's Party ran as part of the Let's Connect Slovenia alliance that took 0 seats with 3.4% of the vote share. Today, the new alliance between the three parties is polling around 7%, which would roughly translate to about 7 seats, with most or all expected to go to New Slovenia. Next up, we have the Democrats. The Democrats is a centre-to-centre-right party ideologically best described as classically liberal or perhaps liberal conservative. It does not have a European Parliament affiliation. It is a party that generally rejects ideology and argues for democratic pragmatism and in favor of work across the political ideological centre. It favors lower taxes on wages and salaries, making Slovenia more investor-friendly and supporting big business. It does have some more active welfare politics too, wanting a bureaucratic reform to healthcare and more support for young and elderly people in terms of housing. On top of that, the party also puts a lot of emphasis on anti-corruption and less bureaucracy. It's also broadly pro-EU, but sometimes critical of its regulatory policy. It's also very supportive of NATO, Ukraine, and generally pro-Palestine, and generally pro-Israel. It's also sometimes a bit of a technocratic party, advocating for reforms to digital and technological solutions for the state. The party was founded in 2024 after existing in some form for a year before that as an association for debate and discourse. It was founded by Andrzej Logar, who still leads the party today. One of the most popular politicians in Slovenia, a former member of the Slovenian Democratic Party who had served as foreign minister and presidential candidate in 2022. His intention with the new party was to shed the polarizing nature of politics altogether. The party attracted 2 other defections from serving members of the assembly, one more from the Slovenian Democratic Party and another from the Freedom Movement. The party has never stood for an election, and this year's election will therefore be its first test. According to Politico's poll of polls, the party is on course for about 8% of the vote, which could get it around 9 seats in parliament, which would be a pretty solid first election for the party. Next up, we have Suvereni. Suvereni is a minor right-wing national conservative party. It does not have a European Parliament affiliation. It is a very nationalist and sovereign party, focused on preserving Slovenian national identity and culture. It's therefore very hardline on immigration and critical of multiculturalism. On social issues, it's also conservative, favoring the traditional family and fighting against woke ideology. In contrast to the Slovenian Democratic Party, Suvereni is very anti-EU and advocates for an exit. They're also similarly skeptical of NATO and are not particularly supportive of Ukraine, instead favoring neutrality. On the economy, it is less ideological. It was founded in 2025 by the Slovenian Democratic Party member of the Assembly, Dejan Kalo, who initially left the group to join the Democrats, but ended up in a big personal row with Andrzej Logar, and so instead founded his own party. Quite ideologically far away from the Democrats anyways. This party is standing in an alliance with the populist liberal Unity Party. This alliance is, however, not at all registering in opinion polls, and so are largely not expected to enter parliament. The only reason Suvereni is on this list is because they are, after all, represented in the parliament today. But it probably won't be long before that's no longer the case. The populist-friendly right nationalist part of the country that Suvereni tries to appeal to seems to be looking at another party, which I'll get to later. But next up is We Socialists. We Socialists. We Socialists is a minor left-wing socialist party. This party also does not have a European Parliament affiliation. On the economy, it is quite standard fare. More public service spending, more nationalization, more taxation, and progressive taxation at that. It is also very environmentally focused, advocating for a lot more regulations and protections. It criticized the rest of the left for not being sufficiently radical. This is a party that strongly opposes NATO and Slovenian support for Ukraine. They are anti-EU, or at the very least EU skeptical, and it's a very pro-LGBT party and very pro-immigration as well. The party was founded last year as a split from the left when their MP, Miha Kodiš, left as a bit of a byproduct of the internal conflict in that party I mentioned before. This gives the party a single seat in the parliament, enough to get them on this list. But polls suggest that they are a bit away from clearing the threshold to be elected this year. Politico does not track their performance, but using their criteria, I get the party at somewhere around 1.2% of the expected vote, not even close to the 4% threshold. And those are all the parties currently represented in the assembly. But there are a couple of extra-parliamentary parties that look very competitive. The first one of these is Resni.Ca. Resni.Ca is a right-wing populist national conservative party. It also does not have a European party affiliation. The party's biggest ideological selling point is its populism, its rejection of the main parties and the traditional debates. Resni.Ca is very critical of immigration and multiculturalism. It's also skeptical of LGBT issues and rejects more liberal views on the culture and identity debate. It is anti-EU, it's NATO critical, and neutral on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's a bit all over the place on the economy, populist perhaps being the best way to describe it, and part of its core DNA is a rejection of authority, including vaccine skepticism and very freedom-oriented views. It was founded in 2020 by Zoran Stevanovic, who leads the party to this day, a former local politician. It was founded as a response to growing dissatisfaction with the then government's handling of COVID. It was especially critical of vaccines and forced lockdowns. It failed to clear the threshold hurdles in the first election it stood in 2022, as well as the European Parliament election in 2024. However, the party has been slowly building support the last few years and is now polling well enough to be seriously in contention to enter parliament. At the last election, they took almost 3% of the vote. But according to Politico, they now stand to take about 6% of the vote, which would give them 6 seats in the assembly. And now for the final party I will look at, Prerod. Prerod, party of Vladimir Prbilic, as it's formally called, is a center-left social liberal party. In the European Parliament, it sits with the Greens European Free Alliance. The party labels itself center-left and moderate. On the economy, it favors reducing bureaucracy, making the state apparatus more effective, and they favor progressive taxation, and they support an EU-led pro-immigration policy, though still managed, of course. It is quite socially liberal on standard issues like LGBT issues and has a lot of focus on combating corruption and trying to change the political tone to make it less adversarial and more cooperative. The party was founded last year by Vladimir Prbilic, a former mayor of Kočevje, and a serving MEP who had been elected on the Vesna list. The big pitch of the party is to change the tone of the political debate. It's never stood for an election, but it has been quite successful at getting attention and making a bit of a political splash. According to Politico, it's just below the threshold at 3%, not enough to be elected this year. However, one poll a couple weeks ago, the biggest poll by sample size for ages, had them smashing the threshold with over 10% of the vote, though this appears to be an outlier. But the party's still right there in the danger zone, and that'll make it really interesting to see if they manage to clear the threshold. And that's that. The parties I think deserve a mention ahead of this year's election in Slovenia. Are you Slovenian? If so, which party are you rooting for? If not, which party do you think you would root for? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.